present, future. We are one! Hi everyone, we are Destiny's Chess! Hey, really? Baby, it's time to let go and spread your wings and let them guide you now. Hey, let yourself be.
Dislyte is releasing the Fatum Sisters, who are based on the Nornir, which were strong women, and they knew the fate of people, and they also could shape it. Now, here's how you know that they were really powerful. It wasn't just peoples that they could both know and change. It was also the fate of the gods. Now, does having the power to change God's fate make them more powerful than the gods themselves? That's a hard one to answer, and I'm not going to do that in this video, but it is kind of showing how strong these were actually perceived to be. The Nornir would be present at a child's birth, and in Voluspa, which we could call a poem just for the ease of it, but it was obviously much more complicated than that, they would etch runes into wooden planks, and that would be the fate of the kid that was born. Now in the older Edda, they would weave, spin, and cut threads, and in one case specifically, they were doing that with yarn, so it was quite literally threads that they were spinning and doing this stuff with, and that would then signal the fate of this kid. Now, if you were lucky, you would have good Nornir that would come to you. And in that case, your life would be easy, quite blessed, and you wouldn't have a lot of difficulties. But if you were more unlucky, you would end up with a bad Norn, which would make your life more challenging in a lot of different ways. The Nornir came from 3 different lines: the elves, the Æsir, and the dwarves. Urðr, Verðandi, and Skuldr were the most famous ones out of them, and those are also the 3 depicted in Dislyte's new esper. Urðr was the one who was the oldest one, and her role was to water the tree Yggdrasil, and she would do that from her well that was under the roots of Yggdrasil. And so she would make sure that the very important tree had all the water that it needed, but also not too much of it to the point where the wood would start to rot. Urðr's name means destiny, and it comes from a very old Norse word that I'm not going to try and pronounce, but here is how it's spelled. Verðandi was the middle one age-wise, and her name meant to stay. Skuldr was the youngest out of all of them, and her name is kind of the most interesting part of all of this. Her name technically means to owe, as in debt, but it also means should. Now, she was also Valkyrie, and as some of you might know, the Valkyries would go into the battlefields and collect the souls of the ones who were selected worthy enough to be taken somewhere else. We can go into that in a later video. In a sense, you can therefore say that Urðr, Verðandi, and Skuldr signify both the past, now, and future, but in a more accurate way of interpreting it, they are, as Dislyte says, the Fatum Sisters, so they were governing fate. Urðr, Verðandi, and Skuldr were living under Yggdrasil, and it was kind of a big area. What is known about it is that there were 3 wells. One is extremely important because that one belonged to Urðr, and that is one that she collected the water from to water Yggdrasil. All of them would reach into distant realms and different lands, and in those wells and springs you would find different animals as well, but that's a little bit outside of the scope of this one, but it's an interesting part of the story as well. So if you're interested, I would absolutely recommend you take a look at that. From the 1st to the 5th century AD, the female deities that were symbolizing motherhood, or like matris is a Latin word for mother. So the female deities that venerated in Northwest Europe during that time and were depicted on different altars and objects were mostly depicted as being in groups of 3. And so it's been proposed that they were connected to the Valkyries and the Dislyte and also the Norns, and that they were stemming probably from them. There are also theories that propose the idea that as there were spinning fate goddesses in Roman and Greek mythology, the idea of these 3 main Norns may be due to a late influence from the Greek and Roman mythological goddesses.